Welcome to Thinkerneur, where we present thought-provoking conversations and interviews. Today, under the banner of the Thinkerneur Institute of Strategy, where we get to learn from people who are actually doing the work. The Thinkerneur Institute of Strategy is the Experience University. And today, we have the pleasure and the honor of interviewing and having a conversation with Mr. Sibongiseni, who is the CEO for consumer banking at African Bank. Welcome, sir.
You know, one of the reasons I want to speak to you and have this conversation is because in our engagements, you know, outside of the titles, there's always this golden thread that comes through. I don't know if you've ever been told this. You know, the world has documented human beings and they've been classified as philosophers. When you speak, I'm like, right there. I get the philosophy, DNA, fiber, and fabric. Because when you speak, I don't just get the professional side of it, but there's a deeper thinking and thought into how you are perceiving the whole thing. It's almost like you have this context of everything, which is beyond. And when you speak and you give guidance, I think it just opens up our worldview, which is what I think philosophy is about, you know, being able to reframe or show us a particular view that we might not be thinking about on a random day, which leads to the point that it is an absolute honor to have you on the platform. Thank you for agreeing. I know it was touch and go, but you decided to give us a shot. Thank you to our platform. So the platform is called Thinkerneur, rooted in strategy. So what we talk about and what we emphasize are these two concepts of clarity and dominance. Clarity speaks to being clear about who you are as a brand. And I must say, I think I'm very proud to have been part of the journey of getting to this clarity that African Bank is in right now. Clarity of your brand, clarity of your role, clarity in terms of your positioning, clarity in terms of who you're serving. That's one aspect. The other aspect is the dominance side of it. It's kind of like a philosophical thing, but the idea is that as a brand, you shouldn't compete. And the idea is that when you compete, unintentionally so or unconsciously so, you play with the room of the competitive landscape. But when you dominate, you can create your own playground, which is where I think African Bank is at right now. So that won't be the framework of our conversation, but I think most importantly is to get to know you, who you are, outside of the title, outside of your exco hat, you know. So welcome, Mr. Sibongiseni.
Thank you for the lovely words, compliments. The reality is sometimes we don't see what's within us. We get on to do what we think is the business of the day. I really don't know where to start. But I think if you ask me, I've come to believe that we are all shaped by our own experiences. Colleagues often laugh in the business. There's a term called SRB. And it's this little reality that for most of us, our early childhood and early adulthood experiences shape what we ultimately become or choose to do in life. And so I was born and bred in a little corner west between the then old Transkei and KZN called Bizana. And that's where my childhood really started. I'm one of 4 siblings, and I had the gift of being the last born. And so people always have their own theories about husbands.
One of my theories is that, you know, the the siblings that came before you were prototypes, and then when you came, your parents knew what to do. The others were just like examples of what we can or what's possible.
Well, I clearly you're probably leading towards being the last one yourself.
No, on the contrary, I'm the firstborn.
Yeah.
I'm the firstborn. There was two of us, and then secondly, my brother passed away. So when you speak about sibling, I don't want to say it's a trigger, but I do think about not having siblings. And sometimes I see people squabble, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm not talking to my brother. I'm not talking to my sister." I'm like, "You guys don't understand. You do not understand." Sometimes I miss just, coming with someone and my brother going, "Hey, are you sure?" Like those conversations where it's fun. And sometimes, maybe on a serious note, being able to handle and share the heaviness of certain things that happen in the family, like, the parents getting older, now I'm solely responsible. It's like, it's daunting. Should anything happen, it's like, there's no way.
You've got a life to be participated.
So in terms of your upbringing, we're going to get into what it is that you're doing. But in terms of where you come from, and you speak about us being shaped by our upbringing, I want to touch on who is Sibongiseni before the beautiful shirt that is gold, that resembles the identity of African Bank. Before today, if you go back, who are you? What are you envisioning? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What's bothering you within your surroundings? What keeps you up at night? Just please paint a picture for us.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, if I look back, I've sort of given you a sense of serious rural background as the gift that it gives you. But actually, there are punctuations in that journey that as you become an adult and you look back, you can see some of those shifts. So firstly, you grow in and amongst serious poverty levels, even if you don't experience it yourself, but you can see it in the community that you live with. You see serious economic exclusion that is often proxied by unemployment. And then you see through your own generation people that just drop out of life, lose hope, do not become meaningful participants in the economy as adults. And over time, you can see the gap that widens. And that's, in a way, what shapes part of your consciousness and part of your challenge to what is your role to deal with this, particularly as you get more privileged. And I do think that leadership, particularly in the roles that we occupy, is a privilege. So part of my early career is what I would probably call acquiring a skill. But what haunts you later on is how are you using that skill and for what you want. And in a way, that's really what sets us up to this African Bank context, most of us. And it happened, I think, by chance. But having worked in the mainstream banking industry over almost 20 years, I sort of ended up at a point where I thought, actually, the gig was about making money for self. It wasn't until I got a call or invitation for a sit down with our group CEO, Thinkerneur. And he ignited inside of me something that I'd known was always there. And it's this simple question: how best do you think that our people, particularly the ones where you grew up in, are best served by legacy players? And that question just lingers on. Because you then realize that, amongst other things, what we had attempted to perfect in our early stage professional careers was to perpetuate and or determine who gets access to million loans. Hold it in our hands. And financial services is the perfect intersection of aspiration, opportunities, and enablement. And so you realize that actually for the better part, depending on the questions that you seek to answer, you might just be perpetuating a system. Let me give you an example. Most entrepreneurs will tell you today that in spite of their robust and solid business concepts, when it gets down to the question, show us how many assets you have, and we shall back you, that's when the idea collapses. And only really the resilient ones are able to stand up. But for most average Joe South African, it's hard to have benches that can back them. Even if the concept has withstood its test, gone through the first 2-3 years of initiation. And that really, if you look at the story of African Bank, is at the core of what we are trying to do. To build an alternative model that is able to back and support the alternative narrative. And that alternative narrative is, if you could have more Black South Africans participate meaningfully in the economy, create a massive middle class, create entrepreneurship in the country, and actually in time would have something that we can model and showcase as the new model.
That's beautiful. And as you're speaking, it takes me back to the inception of African Bank and reason for being. In the African Bank context, that was 50 years ago. What you speak about today is exactly why the bank was initiated. Why is it that the system is still the system and it has not changed? I guess my question is, it's in two parts. Why is it still that way? And how is African Bank different from the banks that are coming in?
Yeah, I mean, you cannot ignore that in South Africa particularly, when we think and talk about opportunity, and when we think about how we distribute capital and all forms of capital, there's still some biases that are hard to eliminate. There's a simple bias about who's worthy of our support. There is the obvious biases about what do we place reliance on or what do we look for. It's this elusive balance between backing the horse or backing the jockey. And therefore, when you're unsure, you back the horse. Actually, as we all come to understand, the jockey matters disproportionately. There's something about the consciousness of doing business, really, which I think in time will come through as a new worldly truth. And it is that if you have got your own limiting beliefs on anything, there's not too far you can go with it. So we've got inherent limiting beliefs about the entrepreneurs that it comes through. So if you go back 50 years ago, at the inaugural session of the NAFCO, leading businessmen of the time across the country, some notable figures such as Dr. Maponya, Dr. Seno Zenyani, amongst others, and various others throughout the provinces, clearly in grappling with their own fortunes at the time, decided on the small idea that if they were to advance entrepreneurship, particularly amongst Black communities, they needed a financial institution that would be able to understand them, back them, and drive their success. Now, those might sound like hollow words at the time, but they remain true today. Because to your point, this calls for an entity, therefore, that doesn't really just think about competing. but an entity that has got purpose at the core. We didn't understand what it looked like at the time because most of us were not around in 1964. Up until we met certain members of the families, those pioneering families, and they gave us texture. And one of the things that they shared with us was, if you were an entrepreneur at the time, there's certain trades that you simply could not participate in. Put differently, you could only trade as a retailer in what's called basic necessities. That was bread, milk, and eggs, and dry goods, for the most part. Secondly, you could not trade in the city center of Johannesburg. And thirdly, it was a privilege if you got allowed to open basic savings accounts. Now you can imagine if you've got no savings instrument, what it forces you to either recycle the cash. And so they realize that their challenge is in their inability to build wealth, meaningful wealth, or even have balance sheet of consequence, meant that when they get to the next generation, and that's what this breed of bankers is born to as a challenge, to take a dream that's 50 years on, but still rings true for most South Africans. And so you'd have seen, reflecting on the legacy that we were handed down, we reduced it to this simple words, the audacity. The audacity to see a reality that was syndrome present in those days' channels. The audacity to recognize the limitations of the day, whether they were legislative or otherwise, but transcend those. So we step into the shoes of the four founders, we values, at the center for living quoted. I mean, as you probably know, there's been phases of how that mandate has attempted to evolve, or the industry down the line, different businesses. And one of them is this simple concept of inclusion. And inclusion is important for us in that it's not a side mandate. Once we've done everything else, then we try to include. Inclusion is at the core, which is meaningful participation. It actually talks to the unique privilege. I use the simple term of SRBs, as rural background. That part of holding that and owning that gives you privilege to understand the unique insights of what people in those unique circumstances really put up with, what their aspirations are, and what stands in the way. Because actually, that's really what businesses should solve for.
100%. 100%. So, in terms of, so I had the privilege of working on the repositioning. I think I have a similar story. You know, you with Kennedy. For me, it was with Smooth. So at the agency I was at, we had the account for a while. I joined just as the agency won the account, and then they launched with Everybody's Somebody. I think that campaign also was quite something else. But, you know, I've been in many meetings. I certainly remember your meetings, you know, as the philosopher. But there was this meeting which I don't think I'll ever forget. I was working on the bank, but I didn't understand or know the context and the background of African Bank. What kept ringing, what was more prominent were the perceptions of the bank, loan shark, all of these things, curatorship, which were not desirable from a brand perspective. He had this meeting with us. It was the first time I heard of the story of African Bank. I was blown away. I was like, oh my goodness. This is such a powerful brand. And the culmination of events is actually what led to this concept of audacity. I think the audaciousness actually starts from conception, this idea of the bank. I mean, you speak about 1964, Nelson Mandela was going to jail. There's risk high risk, right? And then the man that you speak of had a different battle or war where I feel like it was in collaboration and we were in sync. Others were fighting a political one, and then there was this economic one, where the idea of the bank comes. And, you know, I always say, for me, it reframes what a challenge is. I see entrepreneurs who start a t-shirt printing business and then they fall out, they can't. I'm like, guys, you have no right. You shouldn't, like, that shouldn't be an issue. I'm not saying running a business is easy, but the complexity of building a financial institution and the dream was kept alive for 10, 11 years. That in itself, I think, is a demonstration or a signal of this audacious spirit. You know, I always joke that there was a time where you look at a park bench, it couldn't sit there. So imagine you can't sit on a park bench, but then you say we're going to build an institution that's going to empower. Like, that is, and for the bank to go through all these challenges. I mean, it's fascinating. I think we were privileged to still have Dr. Sam with us throughout this journey. And he was sharp, right? He was really sharp.
They remembered every event, every incident, every conversation in the journey.
100%. The point I'm getting to is, you know, when you look at a culmination of, in fact, there was a slide where it shows the lettering out of idea, the challenges, Dr. San going to London, all of these things, curatorship, they all led it up to this idea of audacity. And I loved what you said. I think if I interpret or understand it correctly, is what you're saying is there's the system and then there's the role of the bank, meaning the departure point should be from this foundation of audacity. When you look at what are the gaps in market, and therefore we should design with that point of view, not saying, come, here's a system, here's a box, come fit in. But what is the gap? What is the need? What are the requirements? Or what do people have? And maybe let's design the requirements to suit the current circumstance, which then leads to your role as the CEO of consumer banking. I think the human being is at the core of what you do. What is African Bank currently doing to serve the people?
Yeah, we've assembled over the last 3 years a team of women and men who are assessed on a number of dimensions, but the ones that really matter for us is that we understand the purpose for which we were birthed as a business. And that rings true for us because it gives effect and direction to what we need to do. We often joke internally that actually we are a purpose manifesting as a bank because of the things that we know need to be done. So the first thing we look for amongst the colleagues that we get inside the organization is how best do they understand the challenges that we are about? Because we are not just a bank that has to manufacture products. For every product or solution that we bring out to market, you've got to go all the way back to understand what is the human insight. What is the unmet need in that instance? Why is it a unique insight? And how do we solve it differently? Give you just a few examples. And the first example is if you think about the normal Jim comes to Joburg from Gaskukuni, a youngster who, through thick and thin, pulls themselves up, goes through university, graduates, interviews, as an example, for new roles, either through graduate program or any other recruiter. This is a truth that we've all known because of our unique privilege and insight, but have never bothered to solve, which is when they get that letter of appointment, their anxieties deepen. Because the first thing that hits them is, how do I go to Johannesburg? Where am I going to live? The reason I use Gaskukuni is really to stretch the analogy, because for kids who live in Soweto, this challenge is true. Because their first job is either in Sandton, Johannesburg city center, and therefore having 3 or 4 multiple taxi rides to get to work is a big anxiety, because it takes away your reliability and your certainty in taking on the opportunity. So you deal with so much else before you actually deal with the professional ask. And so we threw the challenge at the team, and they came back really and they said, so being African Bank means the first thing we have to solve for is to help career starters with finding accommodation. And how do we do that? We go and we partner up with leasing agents, we sign up arrangements with them, and importantly, because we understand the economic circumstances of those kids, together with their parents, we then say, we'll back you. We'll back you to put the first rental guarantee, to be on us. We'll back you to have a starter pack that allows you to buy linen, to buy your starter pack, to move into your apartment, because you're a career starter. And your background doesn't allow you to have a financial base that unlocks all of these things. Now, if you think about what a traditional legacy player would do, is that, say, we offer you a transactional account and a credit card. But no one knows how that solves for what really matters to you. And so even at the core of designing solutions, the loops that we go through on deepening insights and understanding the privileged insight within what we think customers are looking for is not trivial in here. You get asked the tough questions. We kill a number of concepts if we don't believe that they meet the acid test of why do we exist. And so we pride ourselves was that we think that actually at the core, we do the things that no one else is willing or prepared to do. And that for us is what brings us credibility to the market that we serve.
Okay. So then how do you balance between, there are always business imperatives, and I think that is mostly what informs the type of products that are created, easy to get into, to acquire and become a customer and be frequent, to be a frequent user. How are you thinking about the taking care of the business imperatives without compromising the customer? I think most people don't go that route because it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it might require perhaps maybe a certain level of patience, because firstly, you need to go deeper to understand. So in the context of African Bank, how do you reconcile, we need to make money, or maybe let me phrase it this way. The norm is we need to make money. And what I'm hearing is that, yes, that is important, but that's not what we lead with. How do you reconcile the two? How does the business think about profitability as well as advancing lives?
Yeah.
Look, it always remains a delicate balance because, quite frankly, in this environment, you have to continue to be profitable. So we hold key matrix, and though profitability is a key matrix, it's not the lead matrix. The lead matrix for us is how best are we on enabling lives and delivering transformational solutions to our customers. And that happens across three levels, both the product and solution level. It happens within, strangely, we haven't gotten to business banking because part of what we do in business banking is actually offer non-financial solutions, which is technical assistance, being on with partners that offer tax, financial, and other advisory services. Because we understand that if we make the entrepreneur or the human being successful in their pursuit, our success is inevitable. And then, of course, the last one is that we invest. We've got supplier development, we've got social investment programs that we bring into communities. For instance, one of the things we've been doing with schools is really to invest in rural schools where we give them digital assets, digital capabilities, and build classrooms for people that would have had to drop out at standard 2 because the next level is 7 or 10 kilometers away. So this is the level of consciousness about our own interventions. So we balance that delicate balance of hold profitability, but be true to your purpose and meaning. So the examples that I was sharing with you on how do we solution within the consumer and personal banking space. So profitability remains core, but really we are held to the purpose. Because to your point, if we lose that and simply go to compete on those terms, then we're going to lose the competition because there's no source of differentiation. I'm pleased to say that if I go back about 3-4 years ago and look at customers that were preferring to come and do business with us, whether it's looking at loans, loan applications, whether it's looking at transactional or new customers that are joining the franchise, we're now threefold up from our starting point. And that shows that customers are, one, recognizing the work that we are doing, they are preferring us, and of course our job is to not disappoint them and be true to what we have promised.
And I think in African Bank's context, losing the purpose for me would be losing self in terms of the brand and the DNA. Because if you think about the repositioning to Audacity, it was essentially going back to the roots.
Reclaiming our heritage.
Reclaiming the heritage. I think that is an uncontested competitive advantage that African Bank has, which it has beautifully leveraged, which leads me to my next question. How would you describe or define African Bank pre-Audacity? I mean, recent years, 3, 4, 5 years back and going backwards to today. How would you define and describe the difference? Not both, in various ways. There's obviously the cosmetic, which is obvious, the logo, the payoff line, the philosophy, those things have changed. How would you describe to the audience what is the difference between pre-Audacity and post-Audacity? And it may be from even just from a structural perspective, from a process perspective. How would you paint the picture for people to say, we are on a trajectory to get to our next 50 and this is who we are?
Yeah, so I mean, if I really look at the relaunch of the African Bank brand post 2020 and 2021, we've gone through an amazing journey of, one, making our brand reason for existence visible for ourselves, visible for our colleagues who work here, and actually visible for the market that we serve. We think that work that group brand and marketing has done for us the past 3 years has been phenomenal. If I look at how we have reorganized ourselves, firstly, we have unapologetically set the mandate that we want to offer a full service banking offering. So that's a big change, because if you think about the African bank of the past, it posed as a microlender. In fact, it was a microlender for quite some time. And there's an interesting story there to really reflect on. And it's this simple story that organizations actually fail in relation to their purpose. So when you veer off your core purpose, that's when you become the other thing. And so at any stage where we veered off what we said we wanted to be for this market, we either disappointed them, and hence failure was inevitable. We have set up, as part of our journey, 2 distinct divisions. And the first division really is what we're talking about today, which is the consumer or the personal banking division. That's really taking that which has been the strength of African Bank and strengthening it to offer more product propositions, to have attractiveness to more people than we were able to service previously. And so the propositions that I've spoken about go into that space. The second one, which has been, for me, one of the biggest pivots in our journey, is the building of a business bank that services the bottom and the middle of the pyramid. If you think about listed and big businesses at the top, we're really about medium-sized to small businesses. That's what we have carved out as our core market focus. And in that business, beyond just building an internal capability, we've gone on to acquire additional businesses as part of that. You would be aware of the old Greenwood Bank. We acquired fully the assets and the interests of that business. Recently, we've gone on to acquire key assets and businesses within Sasfin Bank to really scale that business. So we've achieved what you might call diversification of client base, diversification of asset class, and of course, diversification of earnings base. So you asked the question earlier about paying attention to profitability and earnings. And we believe that business, because of its inherently lower risk profile to the consumer business, put together will give us what we are solving for from a quality of earnings and return on assets point of view. And of course, you often ask the question, how are we thinking about returning this business to the people? Ultimately, we are intent on, at market conditions permitting, take this business through a listing. Yeah.
What would that mean for the organization and people?
We've started on that journey. Actually, if you think about what we've achieved in this last year, we have carved out about 10% of the equity or shareholding in this business now sits in the hands of colleagues and employees of the bank. So we have employees who are shareholders as we speak today. And of course, that journey continues as we offload some of the shareholders through a managed IPO process.
That's impressive. Would you say, you spoke about the upbringing and you getting a call, is how you think and how you lead informed by your background?
Yeah, the journey of leadership is interestingly a tumultuous one, where I think if any professional were to admit in the early stages you are trying to mimic that which is being done. You strangely are trying to become something that you inherently not. And so you need lots of support, you need lots of intervention, you need lots of coaching, and you need lots of self-awareness. In fact, one of my previous mentors, Dr. Koza, coined this for me. He said, at the gate of leadership is a big mantra written, know thyself. And he says, once you've reconciled with that, the rest gets much easier. And knowing yourself is not just about knowing your own strengths. It's actually knowing your blind spots. Because the way you show up under pressure is actually your blind spots manifesting. You become the thing that you had hoped no one would ever see. And so, yes, we borrow a lot from our own social upbringing. But there are inherently things that you are either great at or you're not. And so part of your recruitment is to always make sure you try and get people that don't act, feel, or think like you. So you're not trying to clone yourself. That is one of the biggest pitfalls in the leadership journeys. Get challenged, see the great in others, and you get better at it. But no one is ever perfect in the journey.
I want to talk about your working experience and what is it that you've learned in the past that you've brought into the business. I'll give you an example. One of my fondest working experience was running a spaza shop at home. I got to understand the business, the bakery business. I got to understand how to engage with customers. I got to understand how to segment different customers. There are customers who, they don't buy from you. You see them walking past with a ShopRite, Checkers, plastic bag, and then when it's tough, they come and ask for credit. So you segment your audience, I got lots of learnings there. From a bakery perspective, I knew, that business is very tricky, where sometimes, because they deliver in the township, they go from one spaza shop to the next. What they would do is they would take bread from the other spaza shop, which didn't sell, and whenever you've ordered fresh bread, and then what they'll do is they'll put fresh bread at the top, on top, and then, so when you check, you simply do this, and then you're like, no, everything is. And then once the truck leaves, you start packing. Then you realize that, the only fresh bread is one on top. The rest is just...
2 days later, you run out of fresh bread.
You have no fresh bread. And then the consequence of that is that customers go, no, those guys, they sell stale bread, which then is like, I apply that when I do shopping. I always go to the one right at the back. So those are some of the things that I've learned. I suppose this question is possibly trying to summarize sort of like your professional experience in terms of what are the 2-3 lessons that you've learned and you are bringing into your leadership and in growing African Bank.
Yeah, I think the lessons are varied because the environments have been varied. So it matters what the instinct of each of the organization is. So there are organizations that are steady state. There are organizations that feel like turnaround. And there are organizations that are aggressively on the leading edge. Leading in those is very different. And actually the kind of people that you assemble for that challenge is very different. And so one of my first realization was that there's actually never quite a wrong person for the role. There's always a wrong person for the context. Because people show up in a particular context. And you can imagine what a steady state looks like. It's like, don't make mistakes, just hold this thing steady. In a turnaround, it's literally every day, high rigor, high discipline. The second one, though, is about, for me, paying attention to team cohesion. And team cohesion is not about cloning. It's just making sure that you set up the team very early on, such that you have got high psychological trust levels. And those teams that build high psychological trust levels, psychological safety and trust levels, they will break through most things. But if you lack that, everything becomes a challenge, because then egos are in play, people don't get through to the nub of the issues, and therefore you get derailed. I suppose really if I knew what I know now, honestly, I'd lead with purpose every time. Because I think purpose is a mechanism by which people either self-elect to be part of the show or not. Because that doesn't change. But what changes is whether people are signed up intrinsically for the journey. I think the last thing for me about this journey is you can put in rigor, you can put in cadence, you can put in being mindful and knowing which customers you're solving for. I think the last thing for me is taking action sooner rather than later. Because that is the most uncomfortable part about leadership.
Is it in all facets, or is it internal, external, launching product, doing something in the organization?
I think most of our regrets really come from not taking action. You hardly ever regret taking action sooner and it turned out to be the wrong one, because it gives you progress. But not taking action is probably the biggest one.
All right. I'd like to end on a lighter note. In one presentation, when we were presenting the Ricky Rick campaign, may his soul rest in peace, there was a particular ending. Of course, we've gone with a different ending, but in one of the variations of our ending, I think for me, the objective was, how do you launch with this idea of audacity in a way that it truly lands without having to explain? I think contextually, a lot of people understand what you mean. Even interpretation from a Black context, like, what does that mean? Like, instantly, But we did some research, which is what I love about research. And then you found that in some contexts, in some areas, we went around the country trying to see if people get it, But the overarching insight was that we needed to do some bit of work in landing it, not necessarily to educate, not a typical this is what it means, but through interpretation. And I remember in one of the endings where we tried to borrow from the real world context, which will then help us explain without explaining. And in the ending, we had Ricky in frame, and what we tried to do was to bring in other people who resemble this idea of audacity. I think at the time we had Laduma from Makosa, who was going to flank Ricky and say audacity in his language, to say Ibanesbindi. And then we had Theo from Batu, who was going to flank Ricky on the right to say Ibalisibete. And I think this is one of the, characteristics that I love about you. It's like you had almost approved everything, but there was this one thing where you said, but I hear you, I see what you're trying to do. Where is the representation of women? And then you spoke about your daughters, which I thought was beautiful in the context. And I think for me, that speaks to your level of consciousness and how you want to play a role in creating an environment and a context. It's not to say you want the world to be perfect for them, but I think this level of awareness, is very relevant and needed. There are many questions I could ask, but I just want to end on a personal note, if you don't mind, to talk as a father, about your daughters, and the significance of us being conscious in the working environment for such things. Even if the idea is great, but not forgetting, you spoke about purpose, being intentional, not forgetting that part, because I think that comes through in how you perceive and give feedback.
Yeah, you almost got my emotions flapping there, because what I had forgotten about the incident, but I can see why it mattered to me. It's become very clear that when your journey gives you something, it's useful for someone else. So in most of our families, and so I'll talk about mine, I have got more dominance of girls and women in my household. That I've had to listen to my son speak to his younger sister and figure out whether that represents the best of what men should be doing in engaging with women. And when I have to call him out, I call him out on the spot so that she knows what I stand for and she can see that I see when things are going wrong. And thank God, a friend of mine said there is nothing called sibling rivalry, you just have bad parenting. So that's kind of that's played out well so far. The second level of consciousness was really to understand that very early on, what we frame and project as superior logic and all its symbols determines how we see success, aspiration, and or otherwise. So the more in our narratives we showcase man as in control, as the dominant narrative, we are saying to the girls in our own houses, we'll let you know when the gig is ready for you. And so it's important, therefore, that every one of us sees themselves in the pictures that we create. So when you put up a narrative, a young kid from Soweto, a seriously rural background kid from Hamdodi, must see themselves as, I can see how this bank is closing the gap for me. And so when we use powerful words like we back you, we mean it. Because that's what we are planting in the idea that there's a bank that backs you and your aspirations. Even the way we do credit, even the way we do lending, we believe that we are in the business of closing the gap between current circumstances and future potential. And if your story makes sense and we think that there's merit, we'll back you. And that's really part of this level of consciousness, to step back and not be too deep into the box yourself. Because the way we show up matters most for everyone in the communities that we serve.
I love that. One final question, but I think that point is very important. From a creative perspective, usually we say, no, it's just a reference. But I think what I'm getting from you is that even in that example, in that it's just a reference, the real thing is still coming, you still need a certain level of consciousness and awareness and intentional effort to be aware and be inclusive, even in your example. So sometimes we just do things and say, no, it's just an example, the real thing is coming. But in that, we need to plant the seed from the beginning. So I'll ask you to leave us with a thought, being the philosopher that you are. Imagine this interview is wiped out, God forbid, is wiped out, and what you're going to say now is the only thing that exists from this interview. What would that be?
I thought we would come back and have the interview again. It's funny, there isn't.
I love that.
Come back and do it again. Yeah, I honestly, if there was one message both to the colleagues, to our audience, it is that it's not often that in a lifetime you get to line up your true north around the realities that you wish you'd be involved in solving for, and the realities of the communities that you serve. And for me, I think African Bank sets up that perfect platform to apply professional knowledge, to apply the resources, but actually to unlock the economic opportunities, which if we do in one generation, will redefine the fortunes of South Africa for the next generation. That's really, if you think about it, the mission that we're on. Unlock the power of what's possible for every individual in South Africa.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So this conversation has been under the banner of the Thinkerneur Institute of Strategy. I call it the Experience University. It's not necessarily academia, but the knowledge that a person like yourself has, I think is powerful in elevating the imagination and creativity of people. I think it's been a pleasure and it's amazing to draw on your wisdom and your philosophies. You've dropped so many gems. It's been beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you, Bogosi, and thanks to your team as well.
Pleasure.